I remember a particular project that showed another way how God can do great things with just the faithfulness of his people that he calls into action. Malnutrition is a major problem in Sudan, especially in the south and in the refugee camps around the country, because the refugee camps were intentionally pushed out into the desert. And so to see malnourished children, it was not unusual. To see young children with their hair fiery red and their bellies protruding and their legs as thick as arms come running up to you and hugging you, it was not uncommon. And as a matter of fact, 1 in 5 children in Sudan don't live to see their 5th birthday. And one of the major reasons for this is malnutrition. However, there is an answer to this problem. God provided one right in their midst, and yet it is overlooked by most of the Sudanese suffering through this condition. It's a certain tree called a moringa tree. Now, has anybody here ever heard of a moringa tree? You have heard of the moringa tree? The moringa tree is truly a miracle. It is a miraculous blessing from God to people who can't use it. The leaves from the moringa tree have so much nutrition and so much vitamin content that if you took the leaves of the tree and you crumbled it and you ate it once a week, it has the ability to act upon and reduce the effects of malnutrition by 40 to 50%, eating it once a week. It is available to the majority of the Africans. However, because it's not traditional for them to know of this tree and eat of this tree, they use it for firewood and let the leaves burn. One of the pastors of the Presbyterian Church became very interested in this tree, and he saw this tree and he learned of this tree from some folks from Germany, and he said, our people can use this. And so his dream was to take this tree and make sure that every village where there was a Presbyterian church had the ability to know about this tree, to grow this tree, and to use this tree. But it was a vast project. First of all, in most of the areas, these trees have been destroyed and used for firewood, as I said, or they've been burned away by the marauding armies because you don't want to leave food for the people you're fighting against. The other problem, of course, is you have to teach people to use something that they're not used to using. So there was a financial cost, an educational cost. There was a whole lot of problems and issues before this that when I was talking to him about the project and I was helping advise him to work this project, I said to him, Reverend Michael, you have to be aware that this might fail, that we might not be able to do this. And he said, no, that's not acceptable. I can't let my people die. I can't let my children die. So we started the project, and he planned it. And the first part of the project for me, of course, I'm an accountant. What do I think of first? I think of money. How are we going to do this? I'm also a Westerner. I come from the West. You got to have money to make these things happen. And at that time, I did not know about Medical Benevolence Foundation. I had churches like yours that were supporting Betsy and I wrote them back and said, if you want to support us, this is very important. And they graciously were starting to collect and gather money. But my pastor friend wasn't ready to wait. He said, we got to move. And so he went to the congregations of the Presbyterian Church of Sudan, some of the poorest congregations I have ever seen in the world. People who've had their churches burned and destroyed, people who are living on the edge on a daily basis. And he said to them, our children are dying, we have the resources, we can solve this problem. And he said, you have to help me get the money. And so the plea went out to the congregations, and it was amazing. The congregations gathered together and started to collect and try to raise funds to get the trees. And the way they did this, of course, they didn't have money to give. So they would bring handfuls of rice or handfuls of corn or a chicken and bring it in front of the altar at the church and lay it down for the church elders to take and sell in market and get the funds that way. Some of them, and this I always thought was amusing, who were lucky enough to have watches would take their watches off and donate their watches, because Sudanese have no need for these things. They're just kind of an ornament for them. And so they were giving up their watches. They were giving up almost everything they could do to make this happen. And shortly, indeed, they raised enough funds to go out and buy 3,000 moringa tree seeds and seedlings on their own, without any help from the West, because the West money hadn't come yet. Then they also needed to have people get trained for this, so they put out another word, and they said, come, what can you do to help train? We need to help train. And so they had people from the congregations illiterate who could not read or write, come and sit in front of the church and say, we are here, teach us, we will go out to the villages and take the word out. They had no way to get to the villages. The only way they could do was walk, but they came by the hundreds. In fact, they came so many of them came that we had to have 5 separate training sessions to teach the trainers, to teach the villagers how to care for the tree and the uses of the tree. But again, they came. They gave what they could give. They gave their time and they gave their energy. And many of them were going to know they were going to have to walk out into villages in tribal areas that was not their own. And that's another interesting factor because Sudan is a very tribal area. And there was a lot of intertribal fighting. In fact, it still goes on. And so if you were Nuer and you walked into the Dinka land, it would probably be as bad or worse than any of your gang members in Detroit walking into a rival gang's territory. It was almost instant death if they caught you, not only for you, but for the village you came from and your family. But the pastors were willing to risk this. They were willing to do this, to go to their churches, to get this word out because they knew the need was so great. It was amazing. I got to be a part of this one time. I got to go on a trip to southern Sudan. I was in the village, and we were at the church, and what we were doing was planting moringa trees in the field behind the church. And as always, when you're in southern Sudan, you sort of stood out. Not because I was tall. The Nuers and the Dinkas, they were as tall as me. I stood out because I was white. And there were very few of the southern Sudanese at that time who had seen a white man. And if they had seen a white man, he was coming and working with their enemy trying to kill them. And so it wasn't a very good experience. So they wanted to see these white men, and it would all come. The children especially, I love children. Children are great. The children would come up to me, and they would rub my skin. And they'd go like this. And they would see if my white would rub off. Or, even interesting enough, they would come up and bite me and try to bite through my skin to see if I bled red because they did not know about any of this. So there I was in this village. The village had come to see what we were doing in the church because not only was a white man in the village, the white man was working in the village, working on his hands, digging. And you didn't dig with a shovel. The ground is baked, sun-baked hard, and you had a wooden stick with a slate front on it, and that's how we broke up the ground to get into seeds in the ground. And we were planting the seeds, and I had the wonderful job of digging the hole and planting the seedling. As I was doing that, and I was sweating profusely because it was about 120 degrees, the villagers came. The children, of course, they were always the brave ones, would get up front. And one of the children came up, and he came up to me, and he was dirty. The flies were on him. He had no shoes. He had no shirt. He had torn breeches that very barely were staying on him. He would have been better off without any clothes. He could tell he was malnourished. His belly was protruding. He was starting to get red hair. His gait was off. He was not balanced. And he came up to me, and he squatted down in front of me, and he sat there like this. And he looked every movement I made. And finally, he looked at me, and he said, "What are you growing?" And I looked at him, and I said to him, "I'm growing something special for you that's going to make you better. It'll help you feel better in your stomach, and the pains will go away." And he sat there, and he looked at me, and he watched, and he wondered. And he picked up one of the trees, and he looked at it, one of the saplings, and he was looking at it. And he handed it to me as I was getting ready to put the next one in, and he said, "Is the God in this tree?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Yes, God is in this tree." And we planted that tree, and he took off then because his friends were starting to tease him for being with the white man, and he got up and he kind of trotted off and ran away. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, amazing, yes, God is in this tree, and God was in that young man talking to me and helping me to see the need